Hey, how you doing?
Hi. Hi, Melissa. Hi, Rabbi.
How you doing?
Where am I? That's not me. That's, but I don't know. Oh, I know. She has problems sometimes getting onto the video. She uses another program too. Well, that's why I also set it up on my mobile. So maybe she's working. Your video isn't working. It's Susan Ellis. I have it on your thing. Right.
There we go. There's a little video.
Well, I did that too. Hello.
Hi.
I see Leah. There is Sandy. There we are. Oh, we're getting the whole
Hi,
crew.
Sandy.
Hi guys, how's everybody?
Getting
Good.
the band back together. I like it.
Hi.
Oh, how do you do?
Hi.
Hi.
It's great to see everybody. Pre-Passover.
You
Very nice.
all individually, but I'm not. No, okay.
I hear, is that you, Melissa?
I'm outside. I'm out front. My house is never real quiet.
I know.
Yeah. Hi, Marilyn, Rabbi, everybody. Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Excited.
Hi, Marilyn.
That's funny. There's we always have trouble with this video because Sue used another program and seeing patients and they can't, she has to shut that one off. Oh, I guess you're looking at my ceiling fan.
Yeah, that's the view.
No, I guess not. That's Leah's ceiling fan. Oh, there's my ceiling fan. Hi, Leah. We both have ceiling fans.
Yes.
Yeah, hi. We do. I think I'll turn mine off, though.
I don't know why.
There.
Hey, Sue.
Go.
I don't know how to shut your doxing thing off. I think that's a mess. I mean,
Is everybody ready for Passover?
Yes, obviously.
Yeah. Working on it. If I get up, I'm making chicken soup as we speak, so.
Okay. Me, I've already made mine.
I've already made mine.
Yeah.
I didn't make my soup yet.
Yeah, no, today was a day for
Hi, David.
Here I am.
Hi, David.
Hi. Hi.
David, hi, David.
Hi.
Oh, gee. I'm helping Debbie get on.
How are you doing?
Hi, how's everyone? I hope everyone's well.
Oh, we're getting there. Who just came in? I can't tell.
I think Debbie Siegel was coming. Her husband was getting her set.
You know, Lebo too.
Oh, yeah. Lebo too.
Okay, well, I have 7:04, so I think we should start diving right in
Okay.
Okay.
for our adventure today. As we are at the Tuesday night right before Passover, I figured Passover would be good to talk about this evening, especially when it comes to something we're all thinking about, I'm sure, which is the Seder itself. You know, the Seder is obviously a very special, very important ritual. I believe at last check, it was the most well-attended, participated, engaged in, performed ritual that we have among the Jewish people. That whether you're ultra orthodox or sort of secular, a lot of times Jews find their way to a Seder in some form or another, whether it's a 15-minute Maxwell House edition or a 10-hour Seder experience in someone's house. I was at a Seder once where even I couldn't hang in towards the end. It was past midnight already, and I'm like, okay, I'm tapping out. I gotta get home. We didn't even make it to the second half of the Seder. We basically left after Birkat. After the
Wow.
we were
Wow.
saying, it's already midnight, time to go home. That's enough. I got to get on the train. So the Seder is going to have varying lengths. My parents, in my as I was growing up, they didn't like it, especially when I went to seminary, went to HUC. Now I'd make the Seder longer. Like, nope, we don't do that in this house. Our Seder 75 minutes, that's it. The matzo ball soup's coming out at that point. So we can't be talking about the plagues at that point. So everyone's Seder is a little bit different, is what I'm trying to say. And throughout the generations, the Seder evolves. The Seder is something that doesn't come out of nowhere. It has its origins, as we can guess, in the Torah. But there are no four sons, in the Torah, right? There are no four questions, frankly, in the Torah. The rituals of the Seder develop, throughout the centuries. So we're gonna take a look at some of the early innovations of the Passover Seder. Every year, I wind up buying at least another one or two Haggadot, and it's just fascinating to see all the interpretation of the Seder rituals. From having Maxwell House or Publix has its own, I think, or Elm still does. I think Publix used to have a Haggadah, right?
Yeah.
Was there a Publix Haggadah? That's my
Yes.
memory.
It was. I don't know if they still
Maxwell
do it.
House.
Oh,
It
there's
was
a
Maxwell House,
The
yeah.
coffee one.
Okay. My one growing up was, I think, from Katav Publishing. It was like yellow and orange. That's the one that we used, in the house. And I have like Haggadahs from every denomination, every major philosophers' interpretation of Passover. It's just really interesting to see all the varieties that one can use for the Passover experience. But the Passover holiday, the Seder itself, one thing I always talk about is that it's our most pedagogical holiday. It's an education-based holiday, which I think is fascinating. And the Passover Seder, the ritual itself incorporates different modalities of learning. And so the rabbis knew even back then that we learn in different ways. And so you don't just read the story, right, of Passover. You have symbols that you look at, you touch, you taste, you smell. It's a very sensory-driven holiday, and it's a holiday based on asking questions. That the more one tells the story of Passover, the more he is to be praised, according to tradition. So we tell the story and we ask questions about the story. Even if we are learned, even if we know everything and anything about Passover, we're still supposed to ask questions so we can all learn together. And I find, at least, through the Passover Seder, that when people ask questions, it always brings me to a different point of understanding, which I always appreciate. Again, it's like any good Torah study, where you can learn from everybody. Someone asks a question, and you go, okay, well, I wouldn't have thought about it that way. But the Passover Seder itself is modeled, I think, as probably many of us know, on a Greek practice, actually. It's Hellenistic, that the Greeks would come together, would sit on fine couches, they would relax, and their servants would bring them, wine and just the issues of the day. And so the Seder practice sort of grows out of the Greek culture, the Greek tradition. But of course, we have our own spin on it, and it does have its biblical origin. So what I'd like to do today is look at the origin of the Seder, starting from Exodus, and then go to some rabbinic literature as well. What I'm going to do, is because there's a lot of background noise and a lot of feedback, is that if you can mute your microphone. Actually, I'm just going to do it for you. There we go. We're going to just have a little mute. That way, it's a little easier to hear. There's not as much feedback, not enough static. And I'll unmute as we go through the text. And thank you for indulging me. So hold on for 1 second. Let me just. That's fine. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and it's going to give us our text. And so, okay. Does that work? There we go. Okay, everyone sees the text. We can nod. Okay, good. So it's there. That's a good start. Okay, there we go. Let me see if I can get a better picture here for everybody. Okay, so Exodus 12, beginning with verse 1. Obviously, we're in the middle of the Exodus story as we're about to leave Egypt. And so all the plagues have come except for the last one. And now this is right before the final plague. God is going to tell the Israelites how, what's going to happen and then how this holiday should be commemorated. So, Melissa, if you'd like to read for me that first, this first part over here, Exodus 12, starting with verse 1.
The Eternal said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. Speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, let him share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby. In proportion to the number of persons, you shall contribute for the land according to what each household will..." I can't see anymore.
All right, hold on. Will eat. You keep going. Right here.
For each. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of this month, and all the assembled congregation of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they are to eat it.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to bring everyone back. Okay. Okay, so there's a lot of fun stuff here to start. And so right in the very beginning, we get the date, right? Passover is one of the many New Years that we have. How many New Years do we have in Jewish tradition?
4.
4, very nice, 4. So Rosh Hashanah, we have our New Year. Then Passover is a New Year. Tu B'Shvat's a New Year. There's no one over the summer that no one cares about. So those are our four New Years that we
What's
have.
the 4th one?
The 4th one is the one that was for the kings. It would be where they would mark the reigns of the kings. So it happened over the summer. And so when it says, the 15th year of his reign, they mark it from that point over the summer. So it's the new year for royalty, which is why it doesn't get any attention really now, because we don't have any royalty to commemorate their monarchy and when it started.
Well, what was the third one?
The third one, trees, Tu B'Shvat.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so we have our Arbor Day, Tu B'Shvat holiday, and then Rosh Hashanah and Passover are different ones. So.
Does that mean the ball comes down in Times Square 4 times? And
Yeah, the matzah comes down.
the matzah.
The horseradish.
Off the Tower of David 4 times a year, right?
4 times a year. So that's sort of how it begins, and this idea that it's going to be the very beginning of the calendar. So Passover marks that beginning. So we know, again, Tu B'Shvat for the trees, Rosh Hashanah for the year. What does Passover mark in terms of the newness? Like what's new there?
Freedom, isn't it?
Freedom, yeah. Springtime, yeah, it's a springtime festival. And so we're marking sort of the beginning of relationship in a different way.
Well, how did you do it?
Oh, there's some background chatter again. Okay. So what we have is that we have Passover commemorating the beginning of the consecration of the relationship between the Israelites and God, or the reconsecration, one can even say, from the time of Abraham. But the idea that the Israelites are going to go from a gaggle of slaves, this mixed multitude, and they're going to become that holy people, which is going to be a affirmed even further at Shavuot upon Revelation and the beginning of the Ten Commandments. And so this is really the beginning of the Israelite people and their journey from slavery to freedom, and really their entrance into the world as a supposed to be a nation of priests, and then this Or Goyim, a light to the nations. So that's what's really commemorated during Passover. And now we're going to get to some of the fun part here that's still true today, but of course in a different way. We get to the lamb, right? And so each family is supposed to have a lamb to eat during Passover. Delicious. Who doesn't love lamb chops? So you have a problem, though. If a family doesn't have enough money for a lamb, what do? They share. Exactly right. Sharing is caring, 100%. So they're going to share, and they're going to come over to your house, and if they're going to have, a piece of lamb leg, they're going to pay for some lamb leg. They don't have to buy the whole thing, So it's very early on, and in our description of the Passover holiday, it focuses on the idea of community, right? That people are coming together to celebrate. You aren't celebrating by yourself. You're celebrating with your family, with your friends, with your neighbors. You're all going to come because a lamb can be pretty big. You can't eat a whole lamb by yourself. You need to have other people with you, and you're going to have this communal festive meal of lamb during Passover. And then you're going to get this lamb being without blemish, very common in the sacrificial system. The lambs, the oxen, the doves, they have to be tamim, be whole. They cannot have any defects or blemishes on them. The Midrash always talks about the idea of God desiring our best, God desiring the best of us and the best from us, or else it's not a sacrifice. You can't sacrifice the three-legged, blind ewe because it has no, commercial monetary value. You're not giving up anything. You have to sacrifice something that's going to hurt you, because that's, a sacrifice to give up an ox, a goat. These things had a lot of monetary value at that time. So you have to sacrifice something that, again, has that value. So you're going to take the sheep, be a goat, or whatever it's going to be. And then you're going to watch over it. Okay, you have to be a shomer, so it can't get hurt, it can't get injured. You're sort of keeping guard over it, and then you're going to slaughter it. Okay.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
The Ten Commandments say, "Thou shalt not kill." So how is this justified?
It doesn't say "Thou shalt not kill."
Well, what does it say?
It says "Thou shalt not murder."
Okay. Well, isn't this murder?
No, not according to the biblical definition of murder.
Which is?
Animals don't count for murder, because we have dominion over the animals. And so that in terms of that being an interpretation, that's more of a modern, Jewish vegetarian, which is their sort of eco-kashrut interpretation. Obviously, the entire sacrificial system can be problematic because we're killing a lot of animals. It's not PETA's favorite portion, none of this stuff. So, but in terms of the biblical point of view, animals are property, animals are chattel, and so you are allowed to do with animals what you will, as long as it's in a responsible way. Because that's that second part of that idea from Genesis, is that we are given dominion over the land, but as stewards. And so we have to be careful. We have to partner with God to make sure that we take care of the earth, but we are allowed to do with it as we will. And animals, again, are part of that. According to the biblical idea. That's why you can even kill human beings, in the Bible. There's a lot of killing in the Bible. But if it's murder, if it's something where it is an act of war or an act of self-defense, that's when you're prosecuted. That's when you can be killed, for capital punishment, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, somebody to take your life. But then again, it's murder as opposed to, through an act of war. It's a really good question.
If you couldn't kill animals, you wouldn't have you could get rid of the book of Leviticus.
Get rid of it, it'd be a lot shorter. Leviticus would be pretty short, as with some other parts, definitely. And so, yeah, because especially right now, we're in that part of Leviticus as we speak, right? So we're in the sacrificial system. And so
is there any kind of difference because it's being killed for food?
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to the idea of stewardship. It's a great point. Is that you're not supposed to, again, willy-nilly kill animals. That's not seen as good behavior. That goes. There's the rabbinic idea. Well, there's two, but the one that I think of more is bal tashchit. Is that it means thou shalt not waste, right? So there's a prohibition against wasting stuff, which doesn't only relate to food, right? But that's part of it. But the idea is you shouldn't be killing something just for sport. Though God knows there are more than a few Jewish hunters, but the idea is you're not supposed to kill something just for the sake of killing it. That's not seen as an admirable trait. If you're going to kill something and use it for something, that's better, so to speak. Again, the vegetarians and vegans might disagree, but that's the idea, is that if you actually are using it for food, then it's skin for other things, and using maybe this other part of something else, you're not wasting. There's also a rule called Tsar Balei Chaim, the idea that we're supposed to have mercy upon animals, not give them undue strain, undue burdens. And that's why in the kashrut system in particular, part of the idea is the animals are supposed to be killed mercifully, right? So again, such that one can. You're supposed to make it a painless, sort of quick, experience, and not mistreat or torture the animals before killing them. Because even though we have that dominion over animals, we still have to act right. We still have to behave, properly in this world. Very good, very good. And now we have the blood, and we're putting it on the doorposts, on the lintel of the house where we're going to eat our lamb. So what's the blood doing there?
Protection.
Angel of death.
Protection, right, from the angel of death. Exactly right. And the blood functions as something that we still have today on our doorpost, which is
Mezuzah?
mezuzah. The blood is actually the first mezuzah that we have, because there was a belief that the mezuzah was supposed to protect the homes of the Israelites from bad things happening. So the mezuzah, right now for us, when we put up a mezuzah, we think of it more as this signifies that it's a Jewish home. Does that sound right? Like that, when we put up a mezuzah, is that what we think about, like identity or something else?
Identity, I guess.
Identity.
Yeah, I think that's usually what we think about. But from a traditional standpoint, that's actually not what it was meant for. It was meant to be a talisman of protection. It was meant to be something that you would put on so people could not attack your home, and the bad spirits couldn't come in to give you the old divine clop on the head. You needed to have something that would protect your home and those who dwell within it, which is why you come in and you kiss it. It's a special sort of sacred object because it has words of Torah in it. It has the Shema, the V'ahavta. There's a shin on the mezuzah. At least many of them have a shin on it. Why a shin? I'll get it.
For the Shema?
For the Shema, good guess. That's a good guess, the Shema. That's a good one. God has many names in the Torah, right? And one of the names for God is Shaddai. That begins with a shin. And so that's why we have a shin on the mezuzah, because it's supposed to be evocative of God's presence guarding the home. In fact, the reason why you have the shin there, as opposed to a yud or to a hey, for one of the other names of God, is that Shaddai, we turned it into an acronym for Shomer Delatot Yisrael, which means guardian of the doors of Israel. And here's another fun fact. During the Crusade times, during the medieval period, you would have two phenomenon, which just shows the power of the mezuzah. When the Crusaders were attacking a Jewish home, the first thing they did was they attacked the mezuzah. They would actually stab the mezuzah and pry it off the door, and then they would go in to ransack the house, because they felt that once the mezuzah was down, they weren't under a possibility or a threat of divine punishment. They had to get rid of the mezuzah first, because they didn't want, there to be, God's wrath in that same way. So they would get rid of the mezuzah first. The second part of this is that during that medieval period as well, Christians would actually purchase mezuzahs and put them on their houses. That way they can have protection as well. They figured, hey, why not? Works for them, works for us. And so the Jewish community would actually sell mezuzahs to the Christian community in order for them to have, divine protection as well. Their money's green as well, it turns out. So they're making good money on this. So,
by the same token, in Tsarist times, if the Tsar's soldiers are coming by, they know exactly which are the Jewish houses and which are the ones they want to make them submit to the pogrom. So I don't know if that was such a great idea.
Yeah, exactly. It's a double-edged sword, right? And that's why there are people today who get worried about putting mezuzah on their house because they don't want their house marked as Jewish because they get worried about anti-Semitism as well, which makes me sad. That we worry about that kind of thing. But I certainly know some people who do get concerned and they don't want to mark their houses as Jewish houses for fear of reprisals from the non-Jewish community. I find that upsetting, but that's one understands. Okay, let's continue with our Exodus story. Okay, where am I here? Okay, Sandy, you want to give us a read?
Sure. They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in a way with water, but roasted, head, legs, and entrails over the fire. You shall not leave any of it over until morning. If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it. This is how you shall eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to the Eternal. For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt. I, the Eternal of Egypt, I, the Eternal. And the blood on the houses where you are staying shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Eternal throughout the ages, and you shall celebrate it as an institution for all time.
Very nicely done.
Very cool.
Very cool stuff. And so we have here, you have to eat it the same day. No leftovers. What's Passover without leftovers? My favorite parts of Passover, my goodness. You make a nice big brisket and you have some brisket on matzah the next day, little meatloaf on matzah the next day. Everything's on matzah, I guess.
The only thing you can pass on is the entrails.
Yeah, don't eat the entrails, to be fair. You're right.
Pass on those.
But that's not good eating. That being said, one of my grandmother's favorite things to do, of blessed memory, was she took the matzah, right, and she would wet it, sort of wrap it in like a wet cloth, and then she'd put hot dogs in it, and she would roll the matzah and the hot dogs. You'd have a makeshift hot dog bun.
Oh my gosh!
And you can do it with dry matzah, really mess everywhere. If you wet the matzah a little bit, you can get a little roll of mustard on it. You're fine.
That is so
Those
funny.
kinds of things. Everyone has their own Passover, sort of in their family, some of the fun things that one does with matzah in particular. I love that kind of thing. I'm very creative with it. Sometimes it's a little beyond me. I once saw a recipe on one of these Jewish food blogs for matzah tiramisu. And I'm like, that's a bridge too far, I gotta tell you. I can't.
Okay.
Can't do it. Matzah lasagnas. I mean, just enough. It's matzah. Get some tuna fish,
We've had that.
salad.
We've had matzah lasagna.
And you're fine. Okay, so here we have our first part of the Seder, right, is a communal meal, right? So we have the communal meal idea already established with the lamb. But now we're adding a couple different ingredients here. So we have the unleavened bread, which is, of course, our matzah, and our bitter herbs, right? And we have our maror. So we have three elements of the Passover Seder. We have the festival meal, we have the korech, we have the lamb. Then we have the unleavened bread, and we have the bitter herbs, all biblical. So we have those things even still today. You can't boil it or really cook it any other way except for roast it. So you can roast it up over a fire. Again, I'll pass on the entrails, but it sounds good to me otherwise. Not bad at all. I happen to enjoy lamb. And then you can't leave it until the morning, right? So we had that before. Why not? What's the deal?
Refrigeration?
Huh?
Refrigeration? No refrigerators?
No refrigeration. You're right. I mean, that one could see that could be a problem, right? You can't refrigerate this food, and maybe there's an element of you're gonna cook this stuff and put it out overnight, and then tomorrow morning you're gonna have unrefrigerated lamb meat, and everyone's gonna get sick.
Off in the middle of the night, didn't they? Didn't they take off in the middle of the night after dinner?
Oh yeah, I mean they grabbed some of the stuff to go. I mean, they were definitely running. They were definitely putting it on their back. There's something to be said about holy objects being treated a certain way, and this is a sacrifice. Leviticus as well is that the sacrificial system. There's a parts of it that says this cannot be left out or left overnight. It has to be burnt up completely. It has to be consumed completely. There's not supposed to be any trace of it left. So there's some superstition, I think. There's some sort of ritual superstition about these objects and how this is to be treated. Same thing with, we discussed it a little bit last week on Shabbat, with the idea of blood, right? The blood has to be disposed of in a certain way, and you can't just do whatever you want, with the blood. There has to be a method to it, or else you can invite bad stuff, bad spirits to come to get you. And so I think that might be part of this as well. And so if it's left over, you have to burn it. You have to get it consumed completely. Nothing can be left over. And as you had mentioned, David, this idea of they're eating it sort of in a way that shows they're getting ready to go. They're girding their loins, the sandals are on their feet, staff in the hand. They're gonna eat with one hand and sort of prep with the other hand, and get ready to go. That's actually a little dissonant from the Passover Seder that we are enjoy, right? Because the Passover Seder is supposed to be relaxing, right? It's supposed to be we're reclining, we're celebrating our freedom. We aren't worried about rushing to the next thing. We can have a 3, 4, 5, 6 hour Seder experience and not have to worry about rushing to the next thing. So that's actually a little bit of a difference. Of course, we don't have a bunch of angry Egyptians trying to kill us after we eat. We don't have to hurry in the same way. And so after we have our offering, then now we get to the drama, right? God's going to go through the land of Egypt and strike down the firstborn, both man and beast. It's basically going to be a punishment against everybody in Egypt, against the gods, because the gods are supposed to protect them, God's supposed to save them, and it's going to be a demonstration. God likes to throw a little weight around in Exodus and in other places. The idea of showing whose God is best. God's going to show that he's God, and the other ones don't count. The other ones are false gods. They don't have the same power, same authority. So God is going to run roughshod over the Egyptian deities as well. And God's going to notice, angel death's going to notice that blood on the door, right? And the blood on the door will mean that the angel death or God is going to pass over the houses when they're striking Egypt. And we're going to a very important word, of course, always in our tradition, remembrance, right? And so it's a Yom HaZikaron. It's not Yom HaZikaron, but it's a Yom. It's a day of remembrance. It's a day of memory. So we're supposed to remember this for all times. That's the interpretation, and of course we get it, pretty explicitly at the end that this is not a one-time deal. We're going to keep this ritual forever, throughout all times. It's that Seder is one of my favorite rituals, I think, for that reason, is because it makes it explicit. The idea that this ritual is supposed to remind us of something greater. It's supposed to remind us something important, something essential. It reminds us of our history, definitely. But I think more so, perhaps, than any other ritual, so could be argued, not be others, but I would argue that more so than any other ritual, the Seder asks us to transform in a way. It's to almost mind meld as much as we can with our ancestors from thousands of years ago. We're supposed to actually consider ourselves as if we were slaves in Egypt. It's actually one of the customs, to say that, it's first person. It's what God did for me, right, when I came out of Egypt. That's what's to tell our children. It's because of what God did for me, not for my great, 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 grandparents, not for my ancestors, but it's for us individually. So the Seder is supposed to be a reenactment in a way, but even more so, it's supposed to literally be almost like a time machine. We're supposed to really think of ourselves as if we were in the land of Egypt, as if we are actually going out ourselves from slavery to freedom, which I think is a pretty powerful image and a pretty powerful metaphor, I think, because it's, again, supposed to make us reflect upon, well, what does it mean to be enslaved? What does it mean to be free? What things enslave us today? Where do we, get our sense of freedom and inspiration from? So I think it's pretty good, pretty important. Okay, our next part over here. Leah, can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no,
I can. Sure.
7 days.
7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the very first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. Wow. You shall celebrate a sacred occasion on the first day and a sacred occasion on the seventh day. No work at all shall be done on them. Only what every person is to eat, that alone may be prepared for you. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your ranks out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe this day throughout the ages as an institution for all time. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. No leaven shall be found in your houses for 7 days. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the community of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a citizen of the country. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your settlements you shall eat unleavened bread.
Okay, indeed we shall. Thank you.
A little redundant?
A little redundant. Gotta get the point across. God is not subtle. We have to get some repetition there. What's fascinating to me, of course, right off the bat, is how long do we celebrate Passover for?
8 days.
I thought it was 8 days.
8 days, but in the Bible it's
7.
7 days. So where did this 8th day come from?
I know, because of it. I think it was because they communication from one community to another community.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Oh, good, Daddy.
Yeah.
Oh,
Calendars a couple thousand years ago were a bit harder than they are today. Now you just look at a calendar from whatever you have it from. You look on your phone when Passover is, and it's easy. But back then they didn't have that. And people whose job it was to really watch the skies and watch the moon and to try to see how when the holidays would be. But if you saw the holiday or that it was coming up, you couldn't always communicate it with a town 10, 15, 20 miles, whatever, down the road, or even worse if it was even further away. And so to make sure that you observe the holiday in the quote-unquote right time, they made it 2 days instead of 1 day. And so you have a 7th day and an 8th day. So if you miss the 7th day, don't worry about it. You have the 8th day too. And so you have a little bit of wiggle room.
So what do they do in Israel? I heard that it's different. They only
7 days.
7 days in Israel and possibly 8 days here.
Well, for us, it's a matter of tradition. It depends on which movement you belong to. The Reform movement keeps traditionally Israel's calendar. And so now we have a calendar. Right now, we don't need to worry about if it's going to be 7 days, 8 days. Like we know we have our calendars all sorted. We can even give it a Google, right? And we can know when Passover is. So, so some people keep 7 days of Passover. Others keep 8. My family, we always kept 8, and it's hard for me to give it up that 8th day, because that's what I was raised with. My father has more of a conservative background, and so we did 8. Even though, according to the Torah and according to Israel right now, you can do 7 days. But the diaspora, especially in the conservative and Orthodox movement, go 8 days for Passover. Have an extra day of matzah. It always bothered me because if you had 2 onegs, the matzah onegs. With 8 days that can happen. 7 days doesn't happen so much. It can't. But 8 days you can do that. So that's our personal choice. Same thing with the just a brief tangent with the kitniot issue. Kitniot aren't mentioned in the Torah. That comes much later. This is beans, legumes, rice, all these things we could make sort of bread products out of. That in the Ashkenazic tradition for a very long time, and again for many still today, you don't eat kitniot for Passover. No beans, no legumes, no rice, etc., etc.
Why no beans?
What?
Why no beans?
Because they can be ground and make bread.
That's right, they can.
You've just taken Sue's entire diet away. Rice, beans.
So what does a vegan person eat on Passover?
Oh, I don't know. I think that's a tough one. Honestly, a lot of potato. I would guess. My mother had a similar problem, though for a different reason. Is that, as I mentioned before, I'm half Puerto Rican on my mother's side, and so my mother can't be giving up rice 8 days. That's a lot to give up rice and beans in my house, and so she would always beg my father to go Sephardic, and we never did. This year, actually, because of all the Mishigas, is the first year they're going Sephardic style. And they are including rice and beans in the diet over Passover. But according to both the Reform movement and the Conservative movement, they have both allowed kitniot to be consumed during Passover. They both passed, pieces of halacha. It's called takana, a responsa that says that they're both in. But again, this goes back to family tradition. When I did it in Israel and I had rice in Israel because they keep Sephardic tradition, it just felt weird. I was so used to eating potato, little latke, little kugel, little whatever. Like it was a lot of potato. And then just to break it up with rice just felt a little weird. But that being said, soy as well. Obviously, soy falls into the kitniot. So there are other grains. Go back to the question. And off the top of my head, I don't remember, but there are other grains that actually don't fall under kitniot, or other sort of, I think like quinoa, for example. That's not it's different, but quinoa, I think, is kosher for Passover. But I'd have to double check that.
I remember anything that can get bigger isn't supposed to be.
Yeah. And so I'm saying that they find some ways of messing around with it a little bit. And so I'm trying to remember which there are a couple ones that I think were okay for Passover.
Quinoa's from the Western Hemisphere. They didn't know anything like that, so probably it's okay.
Yeah, it might have been okay. But like I had a friend of mine who always said that he couldn't have broccoli during Passover. And the reason was because in his family, for whatever reason, broccoli was pasul. Broccoli was not allowed during Passover. It didn't make any sense to him, but he never had broccoli during Passover. For whatever reason, that was his family's tradition, that broccoli was out. Some people it's not a sacrifice, but he liked broccoli. Other people don't complain so much about broccoli. So again, that's personal choice whether we want to keep the kitniot in or not. So we have, you have to remove them from your house, and so it's the chametz hunt. Where you go around with the feather and the candle and the whole thing. That comes about later in terms of a tradition, but it is actually biblical. The idea is just to remove all of the leaven from your houses, and the idea is that it's a big no-no to have the bread during Pesach. You're actually excommunicated. You're cut off if you do it. This reminds me my previous pulpit. I love this story. He tells it just as much as I do. I was meeting with my temple president during Passover, And I think it was the third, fourth day. Now, usually during Passover, I don't eat outside the house at all, but he wanted to meet. He was hungry and he wanted to eat something. And so we went over to a restaurant, and I had a little water. I think I had a little coffee, actually. And the waitress comes over, the server comes over and asks what we want. And without missing a beat, he orders a bacon cheeseburger. I'm looking at him going, it's Passover. Come on, what are you doing? And he didn't keep Passover much more past the Seder. I think he had matzah during the Seder. After that, he was good to go. So that was his tradition.
Oh my gosh.
And so it became a running joke and a running story between us, that the temple president ordered us bacon cheeseburgers during Passover. But that was his energy. He was a great guy. He was a lot of fun. But yeah, a little bit beyond me. That's a bridge too far. And he would have been excommunicated for a number of reasons, probably. The first day is a sacred day, and the last day is a sacred day. What does that designation mean, sacred day? It actually tells you a little bit as.
Sanctification on the first day, sanctification on the seventh day.
Just because it's I was going to say the no work. That's
no work.
It makes it special.
Yeah, it becomes like a Shabbat, basically. So that's why the first day, though in the conservative movement, it's the first two and the last two, right? Days become Chag. They become no work days. And so you have ritual, you have services, and you don't have services as much during Chol HaMoed, the non-sacred days, so to speak, of Passover. It's the secular days of the holiday. But the first couple days and last couple days are sacred occasions. That's why we have Yisker at the end of Passover, right? It's part of the festival calendar at that point, and we do Yisker at festivals. So, sacred days. Okay. And
Rabbi, I'm curious. How on earth do people see these as holidays? There is so much work involved.
There's so much work involved. It depends on how we define work, I guess, right? But I think about that in an Orthodox family because I think, as some of you, I think I mentioned already, today, is you're already starting to prepare. You're starting to cook. And so it's you have to get all this cooking done, before light the candles, for Passover. And so it's a lot of work. And then the day of is less work, because you already made all the food, made all the stuff that you have to make. But yeah, there's a lot involved in it. And this year, goodness knows, there's a lot involved in it for a lot of people. I have just a lot of friends of mine, and maybe you're in the same boat with this, that they have big seders, in the past, and that everyone does a little bit of the work, everyone does a little bit of the cooking and whatever it is. And now people are doing all the cooking themselves.
Exactly.
Doing all the stuff themselves, which you don't have to do as a note. I mean, I feel like we sometimes put a little bit too much pressure on ourselves to do that kind of thing. But people are getting all their Passover preparations going, making the soups and the briskets and the chicken.
And nobody's going to be here, though.
And yeah, it's a lot of food. And I didn't alter my recipe, so I got soup for 20 on the stove. And that's going to be a problem because my kids don't eat it.
Oh dear.
So it's just me and Elizabeth going to be eating soup for 6 days.
Freeze?
Yeah, gotta freeze it. My freezer's already packed with all the chametz. Exactly right. Yeah, we play that game during Passover. Is this still good? It's been in the fridge. How much will this poison us at this point? It isn't growing another thing yet, so it's okay. Okay. So yeah, this is a little bit redundant as we mentioned. This gives it again this idea, but the change is that we get it called. Actually, I passed it over. No pun intended. The name of it again, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, right? And so we get another name for the festival because Passover, like other holidays, is going to get more than one name. So it's Passover, it's Pesach, it's Laman Cherutenu, it's Chag HaMatzot, it's all these different names. It's the season of our freedom, the festival of unleavened bread. So we get different names for this festival, and today we get one of our names of the holiday. We're still actually in the Torah. Okay. Debbie, you want to give us a read?
I will. Moses then summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go pick out lambs for your family and slaughter the Passover offering. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in blood that is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the two doorposts. None of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For when the Eternal goes through to smite the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts, and the Eternal will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. You shall observe this as an institution for all time, for you and your descendants. And when you enter the land that the Eternal will give you, as he has promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children ask you, 'What do you mean by this rite?' you shall say, 'It is the Passover sacrifice to the Eternal, because he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but saved our houses.' The people then bowed low in homage, and the Israelites went and did so, just as the Eternal had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did."
Excellent. Thank you very much. Oh, I love it. I'm a Passover romantic. I just love this part of the Torah. I just think it's spectacular because again, this is in the Haggadah, right? Itself, that when the children ask you, right, what do you mean by this, right? It's because of what God did, for us. And so a lot of this is a little bit, we got the gist of it from before that we have the blood going on the lintels, and it gives us how to do it. Take a little hyssop, give it a little dip, wave it around, and put the blood everywhere. And so that the God / the destroyer, nice word, is going to come. And of course, one of my favorite words, because we don't get to use it enough, is smite. You never get to use smite anymore, or in the past tense, smite. So we have that here. But this idea of Lador Vador, I love parts of the Torah that really make that explicit. This idea that we are doing this from generation to generation. We are going to be telling our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren about this rite. And we're going to explain about, what God did for us, this great act, this great miraculous act to bring us out from slavery to freedom. Very nice.
So the Israelites didn't leave in the middle of the night. I was wrong. They left the next morning.
The next morning, but they're getting ready to go. So it's that, there's actually a lot of scholarly debate and rabbinic debate about when they actually leave. They try to figure out, what time to the minute, did they actually, but say Israel, when did they actually leave Egypt? Because it goes back to our Mishnaic and Talmudic idea of, well, when is day? When does evening officially become morning? It was 1 a.m., morning, so to speak. Is it the next day already? And so when do they actually pack up their stuff and start hitching a trail out of town, beating the trail out of town?
Right.
Okay. So now we're going to fast forward a little bit to Rabbinic Judaism. I see we don't have a lot of time left, but we're going to take a little bit of our Mishnah here and see some interpretation. In the Torah, we had the lamb, we had the bitter herb, we had the moror. The moror, that's the bitter herb. We had the matzah, and we had communal meal. We also had that, but there were a lot of elements missing. So the Mishnah comes in to give us some more of how this Seder meal is going to be created. And of course, this takes place, this work is around the 1st century, 1st, 2nd century is when it's codified. It was passed down orally from generation to generation. But now, in 2nd century or so, 1st, 2nd century, it's more written down in a sense. And that's why we have this text over here. Let me see here. Who's still around? Who's still with us? Okay, that's good. So the Mishnah over here, a man may not eat it, as in the Passover the offering, until it gets dark on the eve of Pesach, from the close of one time of the afternoon offering. Even the poorest persons, remember we had this in the Torah, right? That you may not eat until the eve of Pesach until you recline, right? So one element's coming in, a little relaxing, a little lean to the side during Passover. So even the poorest person should be in a position to recline. And the communal officers must give him no fewer than 4 cups of wine. Now our wine comes in. Huzzah! Manischewitz for everybody. Oh my goodness. They must do so even if you receive money from the charity plate. So it's so important that you have 4 cups of wine, but you can actually get tzedakah to get your booze, which one might not think is essential, right? If you're a poor person, if you are not in a situation to afford wine, you say, well, skip the wine. Have some water, have something else. But the rabbis say everyone, even the poor people, should have those 4 cups of wine during Passover. And even if it needs tzedakah to buy the wine. This is well, again, a little harder nowadays, I guess. My public service announcement always is that Passover is a great opportunity if you have the inclination to show a little Zionist spirit. I love buying Israeli wines for Passover. I just think it's a great way to commemorate the holiday, commemorate the festival of our freedom, and also show a little Zionistic spirit. Because Israel now, thank God, produces some really good wine. From the Galilee, from the Golan, really good stuff, really high quality, kosher wines. So we don't only have to drink Manischewitz during Passover. How many of us, by a show of hands, are used to having Passover Seders either in their, in years before or even now, where there's a lot of Manischewitz on the table? Anyone? Yeah, I see a few hands raising up there. My family had Manischewitz everywhere. If we were lucky, we had like whatever the step up. The Baron Herzog wines. But now you can find again some really good kosher wines. Maybe too late for this year, but another year perhaps. It's really a nice opportunity to support Israel, support the Israel economy, and get a really nice bottle of wine at the same time.
Do they taste different?
What?
Do they taste different?
You know what? I have found that kosher wines, unless you're really a wine connoisseur, which is a different thing altogether, but I find they taste really good, and you can get a really good Merlot that tastes like a Merlot, a really nice Pinot Noir that tastes like a Pinot Noir, which I appreciate. Comparatively to drinking just the Manischewitz, which don't get me wrong, I was raised on it too, so I don't mind a little glass of Manischewitz now and then, but 4 cups of Manischewitz I don't need as much. But if you have a little bit of these Israeli wines, I think it's a little bit better for me personally. I think it's nice.
Oh, Rabbi, on here it talks about the reclining. Is there anything in the Bible about reclining with the pillows around you and wearing all white? Where did that come from? I remember my grandfather doing that.
That's great. No, exactly right. So this all becomes as a perfect example of things get layered onto the Seder as time goes by. And so the white, comes much later. I think that's probably late medieval. Probably the white comes in. The pillows, the reclining comes in here, but with less specifics. But the reclining comes in during the rabbinic time. So a lot of the parts of the story, right, or the Haggadah, I should say, that we're used to, it's a compilation document, the Haggadah. It keeps on growing through time. So another good example is Chad Gadya. Chad Gadya is late. The one little kid for 2 zuzim. Like this comes much later and becomes standardized in Haggadahs. But there's no Chad Gadya in the Torah. There's no Chad Gadya in rabbinic times. Chad Gadya comes much later, as do some of these other songs that we're so used to for the festival. Even Charoset, we haven't mentioned even Charoset yet. That didn't make it yet. Parsi hasn't made it yet. I think Parsi makes it in here. We're not going to have time to hit it, I think. But these are additional elements that come in through time. And so here, the first cup of wine is mixed because back then you had to mix the wine, at the table. So you mix the wine, and then the Beit Shammai, the known opponent of Beit Hillel, says he recites the blessing for the day first, and then recites the blessing over the wine. Hillel disagrees. He recites the blessing over the wine first, and then recites the blessing for the day. So it basically do you do Kiddush first? Brei Pri Hagafen, or do you do, another prayer where you sanctify the day, of Passover? And of course, Hillel's almost always right, so Hillel's tradition we follow. We do Kiddush first, and then we sanctify the day. We continue that longer prayer, right, for Kiddush that sanctifies the day and the people of Israel. And so here we do get our lettuce, right? We get our green vegetable over here. The vegetable we set before him, dips the lettuce until he reaches that with which he accompanies with, the matzah. So we have the lettuce first. Then here we go. It is here. So then we have matzah, our green leafy vegetable. Then we have our charoset, a mixture of fruits and spices. And then some cooked foods come afterwards. Even though eating charoset is not a commandment. There's no commandment. Remember, there's no blessing in the Haggadah for charoset. Charoset becomes traditional, but it's not a ritual food in the same way. There's a blessing for matzah, a blessing for maror. We bless the green leafy vegetable, the brei pri ha'etz. We do not bless the charoset. That did not work out. They did have this argument here about whether it should be a commandment or not, but it didn't make the cut.
What's the maror? Is that the bitter herbs?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the maror is the bitter herbs, the horseradish.
What are you reading from? What is this?
This is a document that I created, but this is the Mishnah.
This is in a Mishnah?
Yeah, this is the Mishnah.
Rabbinic stuff. Not
Rabbinic literature. This is Mishnah Pesachim. So the laws of Passover. One more brief thing before I have to hit the merry trail and move to Derech Torah to the next class.
Will you send us this so we can read it in detail?
Yeah, I can cut and paste it because I have to take it out of this format because it's on a Hebrew word processor. But I can cut and paste and send a Word document over.
Yeah, it looks interesting.
Yeah, I'll do that, definitely. So charoset, I was raised on apples, walnuts, and manischewitz for charoset, which I'm still very much used to. Is that what everyone makes at home too?
Dates.
We put dates in also. Cinnamon sometimes.
Grape juice.
Yeah, we use grape juice.
In a non-coronavirus year, do yourself a favor. Find some good recipes. We're actually putting some up at TBI. We're going to do it, I think, on the 7th day of Passover. Just putting up some information on Passover every day. But these like Sephardic charoset, the Italian ones, the Moroccan ones, there's all these recipes for charoset that have dates and figs and almonds and honey and wine. I made it a few times actually. The yellow raisins, and you cook that sucker over a pan, for hours on end until it becomes a whole delicious. Puts Ashkenazi charoset away. So it's Sephardic charoset. That's where it's at. I'm Ashkenazic born and bred, but I love that Sephardic charoset. So find a good Sephardic charoset recipe. Do yourself a favor. Really sweet, really good. Okay, everybody. Have a great Passover. If you're leaving us, our next class is coming up in 2 minutes or so. Just need to stretch a little bit, and we're going to do Derech Torah. We're going to do the theology of Mordecai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. And so I know a lot of you are staying on for it, and everyone's welcome to stay on for it. So that's good.
Don't forget the pink moon, you guys. Remember the pink moon tonight.
Super moon, right? Tonight?
Yeah, I went out, but I can't see it yet.
Well, if we just stay here, will we be in the next class?
Yeah.
What is it? Leah?
Yeah. If you stay here.
Oh, the pink moon. I went outside to see it, and it's not up yet.
Oh, okay.
Pink moon?
I know that, okay.
The pink moon.
Yeah.
Harvest.
It's an Indian thing.
So tomorrow's the full moon, right?
Well, I
Is
think
that what
it's tonight.
signifies Passover, the full moon?
Yeah, it should be. Yeah. I think that's
It looked
that's
pretty
right.
full before.
It's
Almost.
supposed to be either a full moon or a new moon. I never remember.
Well, it looked full tonight, so it's probably going to be full tomorrow.
That makes sense to me.
But some of the holidays are new moon, right?
I think so, but again, that's not my area.
Okay. All righty. Thank you. I might come back later if Sue's still on it. But.
Okay.
Okay. See you in a couple.
2-minute break.
A little l'chaim and
I'm taking a little break.
fair enough. I'm taking a little stretch. Oh.
Nice chicken too.
Did you get any of the, Bill is doing some reading, getting some of these hilarious things, writings about the coronavirus and how Jews are dealing with it. Bill's been, I think I've been sending it to you. Did you get any of them about the mask, the red wine and the white wine?
I'll double check it. I might have gotten them, but I've been doing so many things.
I know. That's how Bill is relieving his stress over this. He just looks for funny things regarding.
Oh, believe me, I don't blame him. I think that's a really good thing to do right now. We got to find sort of our places for humor wherever we can.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing on Facebook a lot of different things. And just nothing, you do a little smile. I mean, one of the nice things that we're seeing during this time is that I'm gonna, say for the Jewish community in particular, that there's been a lot of great, new music and a lot of sort of great innovation that's being done by different people just to give us something to look at, something different. A lot of great collaborations, so that's been nice to see. And I'm part of a Facebook group right now. It's a multi-faith clergy group on basically being a pastor during the time of coronavirus. And people are sharing resources and ideas and just frankly telling everyone to take a little deep breath because there's a lot to do, a lot going on, and self-care is important too. And so we're all just trying to navigate through this the best we can. I hope everyone's doing the same thing, is finding ways to take a little self-care and just try to find some moments of tranquility and normalcy in a very not normal time.
We were watching something on Netflix. I don't say it's not appropriate for your kids for sure, but we were watching something called Unorthodox about.
Oh, I watched that.
Fabulous.
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, not for kids for sure.
No, but that's most of Netflix for me is not for kids. My Netflix, we have different Netflix logins, so that way the kids can get their stuff.
But what a wonderful series. We finished watching it. It was just wonderful. We're telling all our kids to watch it.
It's based on the book, right? From I forgot the person's name, but yeah.
Didn't you want it just to continue?
Yes, because I don't want to give the ending away, but yes, I wanted to continue more and more, just like Grey's Anatomy.
Between that, has anyone caught the on HBO the Philip Roth series?
No.
The Plot Against America. It came out many years ago. They made a series out of it.
Oh, Gerald, can you tell me about that lamp?
What lamp?
In the corner behind you.
Oh, that's Frank Lloyd Wright design. That's from New York. It was from Macy's. It's cut glass.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I bought it. Somebody had damaged all the lamps, went into the store and cut the cords.
Yeah.
Yes, they would do that. They'd slash furniture. Well, I got the lamp. It was about a $500 or $600 lamp, and we just had a new cord put on it. But it's really very neat.
No, it's beautiful. We have glass lamps too, and I that's a different pattern.
Yeah, it's kind of a pyramid shape, which I had not seen up until then.
Do you know the name of it?
No, all I know is it's supposedly based on a Frank Lloyd Wright design of some sort.
Is it a recent purchase?
No, I've had it about 25 years.
Really nice.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a design for one of his houses from Chicago.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you can see it in the museum in Chicago.
It's kind of a, what do they call it, prairie style? Or
prairie style, right.
Style.
Well, that answers my question. I know Karen is with us now, so that's good. You don't have your video on.
It's Frank Lloyd Wright, which is not Mission.
Yeah.
No, I know, but it sort of fits in with Mission style easily.
Yeah, but Mission is
if you're decorating, it fits.
Okay, let's dive right in. Okay, so today we got Mordecai Kaplan and religious naturalism. Mordecai Kaplan is one of the most revolutionary figures in modern Jewish theology, and one could even argue modern Jewish life, because a lot of the things that we enjoy now and take for granted, he actually helped institute, he actually helped create. And in addition to his theology, but he is a fantastic thinker. and he was really very influential. And we're going to talk about that first, just as we give a little bit of a bio on our subject today, our subject here. So everyone got the screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So Mordecai Kaplan, a brief biography, an author, educator, and of course the founder of the Reconstructionist movement of Judaism, which is now a major denomination in American Jewish life. And so, we usually think of Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. And then on the other ends of it, so to speak, you have Reconstructionist, and you have the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, who break into about 25 different subcategories. And then we also have another, 5 or 6 small denominations of Judaism as well. But Reconstructionists have definitely broken in to being part of the big four, so to speak, not counting the ultra-Orthodox, because they have, again, so many, obviously so many different denominations within the Haredi movement.
Can you define that for us Reconstructionists?
So that's actually going to be defined sort of through the discussion of the theology. But what I would basically say is that Reconstructionist Judaism imagines prayer and God differently than the other movements, and focuses on the idea of Jewish peoplehood. So it's a little bit more cultural by its nature, and a little bit more about the Jewish history than it is about ritual. With all of that said, that's the reason why I put a little tangent there. The Reconstructionist movement itself, just like the Reform movement and the Conservative movement, have gone through levels of change throughout their time. And so a Reconstructionist movement was 60 years ago is a little bit different than, or it is significantly different, I think, than where it is today, because Reconstructionist Judaism has a great emphasis now on spirituality. And so the true Mordecai Kaplan Reconstructionists, I think, are a little bit more fewer and far between as the movement has evolved through time. But that was how it was characterized in the beginning, a great emphasis on culture, on history, and less on theology, less on the idea of a personal God, and less on the idea of ritual. And so one of his great innovations that he's very well known for is that he created, so to speak, the bat mitzvah ceremony. So before this, you only had bar mitzvah, you didn't have bat mitzvah. But he, said to himself, hey, look, I got a daughter, and she's studying Judaism as much as anyone else. There should be a ceremony to mark, what she's doing. And so we have a bat mitzvah. So his daughter Judith is believed to be the first ever bat mitzvah in American Jewish, or really in Jewish history, American Jewish history, but Jewish history. Because no, they weren't doing it anywhere else. So, so he innovated the bat mitzvah. Not a bad thing to start with, right? If that wasn't enough, he also helped create the JCC. He helped create the first JCC in New York, because he wanted he wanted a place, I should say, for Jews to get together, regardless of their religious background. And so he wanted them to play together, to hang out, to do sort of cultural things. And so he helped create the JCC, and also Chavurot, the idea that you can get together in small groups and learn together, but also just do Jewish stuff together. And it doesn't have to be about religious services. It doesn't have to be about ritual. It can be just hanging out and doing fun Jewish things together from a cultural, historical, perspective. And that obviously has had a huge influence still today, because JCCs are very popular, and Chavurot are increasingly popular. They were popular before, and I think every year you hear more and more about them as ways of getting Jews together to socialize and do fun stuff. A little bit of background: he was born in Lithuania, came to the United States at a very young age, studied at Columbia University, then went to JTS, the Jewish Theological Center. So he was ordained, seminary, I should say, and then he was ordained as a conservative rabbi. And so as his rabbinate evolves, he obviously moves from conservative Judaism and begins to sort of create his own movement. I wouldn't say not intentionally in a lot of ways, but his ideas helped give rise to another movement, which is similar with Reform and Conservative Judaism, is that, these movements didn't start with the idea of being denominations. The idea is being that everyone's going to be doing this. We are reforming Judaism, right? We are changing it for everybody. But that's not how it worked out. So we had splits and divides, surprise, surprise, on how Jewish practice should move and how it should look in the future. That's where denominations come from, because back then it was just Judaism. It was practiced, not practiced in different ways. But eventually they said, okay, we're going to try something different in order for Judaism to succeed, to thrive in the future. It needs to have changes. And so that's where we get movements from, because then everyone always agrees with the changes, but what is important and what is not important.
Did he immigrate with his family or just by himself?
With his family.
His parents?
Yeah, his parents. His parents brought him over. He was like 9 when he came over. So he came with his parents.
Why did they come? Why did they come?
I'm guessing it just, wasn't so much fun for a Jewish guy in Lithuania, really at any time, frankly. And so I don't think that they were looking to stay. I think the political situation there wasn't so great. The late 80s were a big time of mass Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe.
So there was a big depression in Europe at the time, and pogroms too.
Pogroms, so economic conditions, just searching for that better life and heading on over. And so he came with the family. As I mentioned, he set up the first Jewish center in New York, and then of course summer camping. So this was a big thing for him, because again, getting Jews to come together to do fun stuff, not necessarily religious. So come together and go to a camp. Do baseball, do archery, do color wars. This is thanks to Mordecai Kaplan, that he's helped create the summer camp idea, which not a bad Jewish experience, right? He's creating camp, JCCs, and bat mitzvahs. We're doing pretty good. He founded the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, which later became the Jewish Reconstructionist Foundation. And then he helped establish the RRC, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia, which ordains both male and female rabbis, and has, of course, spawned a rabbinic association and an organization of affiliated congregations as well. So it has become, again, a movement proper. It's had something where people are involved in on a movement level. And he was a writer, of course. Judaism as a civilization, Judaism without supernaturalism, the meaning of God in modern Jewish religion, and questions Jews ask. And so, of course, we're going to be concentrating on those, some quotes from his major works here. So, civilization, very important. So, Judaism as a civilization, that's a key term in Reconstructionism. So, Kaplan defines Judaism as the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people, which means that as our circumstances change, the way we understand Judaism can, he argues, and should change with the times. So what was good for the biblical Jewish community might not be so good for the 21st century Jewish community, he would argue. There were things that they did then that we don't have to do now. Doesn't mean it was wrong, but it means that it was good for that time, and civilization has moved on. From the Bible, period, from the rabbinic Judaism, period, that we are not beholden to ideas from 1,500 years ago necessarily just because they are part of our heritage, because our heritage is a history of evolution, he would argue, of progress, of change, that Judaism is constantly reinventing itself throughout the time, and that's not threatening. That's just part of what it means to be Jewish, is to be reinventing yourself, to be evolving through time, to be progressing through time. And so each Jewish society is going to be different, and that's okay. We aren't changing Judaism. Judaism means that there's going to be change. There's inherent change within Judaism. So Judaism, by its necessity, evolves like anything else. And so that's a very different idea. when you have people who say, well, we should do things the way we did it 2,000 years ago and keep to the same laws, the same ideas, the same principles. He believes that Judaism, that change is fundamental in Judaism. And
But
that
don't they sort of emphasize it's choice?
yes.
You honor the past, but it's your choice to honor it, but not necessarily observe it.
Bingo. So that's going to be a hallmark of progressive Jewish movements. So Reform movement in particular, uses a lot of those words that you're saying, about sort of choice and autonomy and not, being beholden necessarily to the past. That one of the big innovations of the Reform movement was the idea that halakha, Jewish law, gets a vote, but not a veto, according to Reform tradition. That we get to look at it, we get to study it, we get to choose, but it doesn't get final say. We have choice, we have free will to sort of find and make meaning. And I think Kaplan would agree with some of that, that theology as well. So that's well said. If we look over here, this is actually a quote from one of Kaplan's works. Deb, you better read.
The conditions which enabled Judaism to flourish in the past are irrevocably gone with the wind. Nothing less than the original and creative thinking in terms of present-day realities and future responsibilities can create anew the conditions which are indispensable to Jewish survival.
Yeah, I mean, I love that quote because, again, this strikes to the heart of what many Reform and conservative, I think, Jewish leaders back in the 19th century would say. They would actually give a similar quote, the idea that we need to change in order to survive. We need to evolve in order to survive as a people. That change is just part of life, and we can't stay static. And that the things that might have made Judaism be successful 1,000 years ago might not make it successful today. And that's a tough pill, believe me, to swallow in synagogue life when you have people who want things to be the same. And when we realize that the things that spoke to us, even from my youth, so to speak, don't speak to today's, Jewish youth in the same way. And how much the more so from, my parents, my grandparents, things that spoke to them Jewishly, or how things were done in communal Jewish life and organizational Jewish life, don't hold the same value, for the next generation. And it's such a thing that we just dray over and we completely make ourselves crazy and pull out our hair. That why aren't they doing Jewish the way we want them to do Jewish? Rather than saying, well, how does Judaism continue to evolve in the modern world? How, if they're not going to join the sisterhood, so to speak, what will they join? Rather than saying, well, you have to do this. You have to, come to services every Friday night. You have to do only this melody. We create these boxes, for people, and then we get upset when they don't go into the box because we say this is how you do Jewish. But what Kaplan would say is that that's how we used to do Jewish, okay,
Yeah.
and how we do Jewish changes over
I
time.
can remember my grandmother saying, "Oh, sorry, Debbie."
Go ahead.
I can remember my grandmother saying, if she was my age and I was probably a teenager then, she wouldn't be changing dishes for Passover and doing all this stuff that you had to do because we always had to drag all these dishes and pots and pans and silverware and stuff up from the basement back up to the house and down again. She said she would never do that.
Yeah.
I thought, people change.
And other religious denominations are doing the same thing. The Catholic Church with letting, they're going through the same process and whatever it's not the same Catholic religion that it used to be because they're going through changes, but there's probably another motive for this Kaplan to be doing what he's doing because he wants more Jews in this world.
He wants more Jews in the world. He wants more Jewish engagement in the world.
Exactly. So he's
right. Is that when it really comes down to it, it was the same for Isaac Mayer Wise. It was the same for Leopold Zunz. It was the same for these other great thinkers of the Reform movement when it started. The question was not how can we create something that's easier, so to speak, for us. It was existential. It was Judaism is going to die unless we change it. Because what we're doing now does not make sense, and it is not in keeping with the modern world. And so we have to do things differently. And Kaplan would say the same thing again, is that we have to change. We have to be willing to grow and to be creative and rethink what it means to be Jewish in a modern context.
I think when you even look at that, taking it to each of us personally, how many times we have reinvented ourselves from when we were children, when we went to college, then when we became parents, till we retired. We've reinvented ourselves so many times, the same way as he's talking about.
100%. And actually, we're going to touch upon a similar idea, but it's good that you got us there, is that we evolve through time, but it doesn't mean that what we believed, what we thought, what we experienced when we were children is invalid. It doesn't mean that we would just throw away all of our childhood experiences because they were good when we were 6. They were good when we were 10. They, who we were when we were 25, was fine. God willing, it was fine. But we change through time, and it doesn't make that experiences that we had and thoughts and perceptions wrong that we had in different stages of our lives. We just change through time. It's natural. It's natural progression. That's really good, 100%. Okay. So, of course, this goes to this point as well. There's a great letter, I'll find it, that Franz Kafka writes to his father. He doesn't send it because his father's dead at this time, but writes the idea about like the Judaism that he was given as a child was not a Judaism that he believed in. And therefore he became more of an atheist as he grew up because Kafka's Judaism, he didn't find meaning in it. He said his father didn't find meaning in it, so why should it be meaningful to him? And the reason was because people view Judaism in different ways. And so Kaplan will note that many Jews don't believe in miracles anymore, or even the idea of Torah given 100% at Mount Sinai, this divine revelation. And so if we insist as a barrier, as a threshold to engagement, you have to believe in miracles and you have to believe in revelation in order to be in the in-group, to be in the camp, in the circle of what we're going to call Judaism. If you need that and don't have it and you're out of the circle, that then becomes a problem. Because then you're going to have less Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Insist on these barometers of faith. And so you have to believe in miracles, you have to believe in divine revelation, you have to believe in the 100% divine authenticity and revelation and infallibility of the text. If you do that and say if you don't believe it, you're out, there are going to be a lot of people who are out of the circle. And he also noted that the social, political, and cultural norms in the USA are different than Europe. And so what might be working in Europe, such that it was working, might not work in the United States. It's very different societies, very different emphasis culturally between the United States and Europe at that time, and also one would argue probably today. And so the indispensable requisite to Jewish revival is Jewish revival, right? So we have to keep on, again, reinventing ourselves, revival in all phases of Jewish life.
It's a good
Structural,
phrase.
religious, moral, and cultural. Yeah, go ahead.
That's a very good phrase. I'm writing that down. Jewish survival is Jewish revival.
Yes, we need to have it. And so then he proposed this shift from the idea of thinking about Jewish religion as monolithic and saying this is what Judaism is, to saying let's focus not on the religion so much, God forbid, let's focus on the Jewish people. What does it mean to be part of Jewish peoplehood? And that's going to be another phrase he popularizes, it's the idea of Amcha, of Jewish peoplehood. What does it mean to be part of the Jewish civilization, so to speak, to throw your hat in with the Jewish people? Again, this quote also I think is very powerful. Judaism existed for the Jewish people and not the Jewish people for Judaism. And so we as the people are creating Judaism. There isn't a Judaism that we all adhere to. So it's a big shift from the way people were thinking at that time. And so we have the preservation of religion require that all Jews, that Jews can identify with other aspects of their civilization. history, literature, language, civilizations, folk customs, standards of culture, social and spiritual ideals, and aesthetic values. There's more to Judaism than just the ritual aspects of Judaism. Jewish people are more than just the rituals and just the theology. So I think that's really powerful. I think about this with Israel, actually, that over the past X number of years, let's say 10 years, maybe a little bit more, the ministry, the Bureau of Tourism in Israel has made a concerted effort to market Israel differently. They used to market Israel only as come to the spiritual homeland, come to see the Kotel, the Western Wall, come see the different religious sites, the early Zionist sites. Now, if you go to like the Israel ministries of tourism, it's come to our beaches, come to our restaurants and our thriving nightlife and our zip lines and everything else that they have in addition to the Kotel, to the Western Wall, and to all this other stuff that we would associate with an Israel trip. So it's not just Dead Sea and Masada and Jerusalem. Come, hang out at the port of Tel Aviv in one of the discotheques. Come to Eilat and hang out on the beach and get a nice suntan. Go to X, Y, and Z that you wouldn't think of again necessarily immediately associated with Israel. So
Are you looking for the pink moon?
Yeah, it's closest to the Earth this month of this year, and this moon is as close as it's going to be, and it is gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's illuminated. It's going to be even brighter about 10:30.
Okay, I'll see if I can stay up that late.
Okay.
Okay. So Kaplan viewed Israel, of course, as the spiritual center of this rich Jewish civilization, but he noted, and again, it might sound a little bit, off to our ears, or maybe not, that Judaism as a civilization is going to be secondary if you're outside of Israel. So if you're in America, you're part of the American civilization. You're also Jewish, but that's your Judaism as a civilization is going to be expressed by its nature more secondary to the American society in which we live and we're surrounded by all the time. And so Judaism sometimes takes a back seat in his mind to the American experience, which is it's always interesting thought discussion. Are we Jewish Americans or American Jews? How do we define, ourselves within a context of a minority population living with a majority population? Okay. Hold on. All sorts of troubles here. Okay. And there and here. Okay. There we go. Okay, so naturalism. We went through this a little bit last time, I believe. The idea is that in the modern period, so to speak, early 1900s, not contemporary, but the sort of more modern period, there was an understanding even then that we can explain the world by scientifically verifiable ideas, that we're going to search for truth, we're going to study, right, and we're going to study, and we're not going to use the Bible as our textbook for science. But that's not going to be how we figure out scientific ideas. We're going to use reason. We're going to use what we can see, what we can experiment, the things we learn from experimentation, not just biblical ideas. And so before that, people, relate to God as a source of magical powers that respond to human wishes. I always call this the genie theology, that we treat God as a genie, and that we make our wishes, so to speak, and say, God, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, fulfill my wishes. And that's how we sort of think about God, is that God should grant us what we want, what we ask for, in that kind of way. And this idea of God being a supernatural entity who operates the world unbound by limitations of natural law, meaning that God can do whatever God wants, right? I mean, that's, we talked about this deal last week, I think, that God is not limited by our experience, and that God can do anything, and that's part of what makes God God in classical theism, is that God can suspend or subjugate rules of nature and bend them according to God's will. And in Kaplan's opinion, that is not helpful
Bill, get the
when
phone.
it comes to God. If we look here
Bill, get the phone.
at this first bullet, Gary, you want to give us a read?
I'm not sure where you read. Number
Okay.
3?
Yeah.
Number 3, okay. To most people, God is not really God, but a magnified demon. That is why they cannot disassociate religion from supernaturalism.
Yeah, and it's the idea of God just being like this magical, mythical creature that can do, again, whatever you want. I would have used genie, but he uses demon. The idea of God just being this force that is an anthropomorphic source, that has a physical presence and has a emotional presence in the world. And Kaplan would say, no, it doesn't work anymore. And he notes that people of a certain scientific sophistication, they have trouble relating to religion if that's part of the idea, that they have to sort of suspend what they know from science from their religious beliefs. It doesn't work well for them. They have to be able to keep their rationalistic mind while also having faith at the same time. And conventional theism doesn't give them that opportunity, in his opinion. So the only kind of religion that can help this person live and get the most out of life will be the one which will teach him to identify as divine or holy whatever in human nature or in the world about him that enhances human life. So we search for the holy around us as opposed to beyond us, is what he would argue. That there's holiness, again, that we can relate to. But if it's a divine holiness that we can't relate to, it becomes problematic. If it becomes beyond us, if we say that God can do whatever God wants in the world, and it subverts our free will or the way the world works, that to him, again, doesn't work. That becomes supernatural, it becomes magic, it becomes Harry Potter. And he says,
is he saying that the people who take the Bible literally are not really religious?
Say again? I missed the first part of that.
That people who take the Bible literally, and there's certain sects that do that, are not really religious, or they don't really, I don't want to say respect, but don't really believe, they believe in a supernatural God if they take the Bible literally.
Yes, that's what he would argue.
Okay.
Is that conception of God, he says, doesn't work for him, and he would argue that it is not appealing to the modern mind because it's that, again, it's a the more you know moment, right? So the more we learn, and once we begin to subvert our intellect and our rationality to believing in something that we know in our head not to be true, it creates a dissonance, right? It creates a problem that has to be solved. And that goes back to even Maimonides, because he had similar argumentation as well, that there's parts of religion that, if it doesn't make sense, you have to get rid of it. You have to throw it out, in a way, and think differently and create something that does make sense. Or else you're throwing out the entire thing, unless you're evolving or changing. You're throwing out the baby and the bathwater. You have to get rid of what doesn't make sense and create something different that can take its place.
Why would he use the word demon?
I know that's. I'm not sure why he picked demon. I would have picked something else, but that's sort of what he used in his thought process.
It's just been something cultural from the time.
Yeah.
It just has a negative connotation to it.
Bingo. Well, when you think about it, it has, in the Bible, you have God often being sort of angry and destructive, and so maybe that's part of it. But I would have put, again, maybe like a genie or some sort of supernatural entity more than demon. I think demon, gives you a little bit more of a vision, I guess, that he wants to portray.
This to me sounds more agnostic. I don't know if that's the right word, agnostic, that you don't know if there's a God. I mean, it has to be proven that there is one. Like, I'm having trouble digesting what we just read. It sounds like it sounds like more like being an agnostic.
Well, we're going to take a look at the next part, which I think will help clear some of that up, because what he's basically saying is what his definition of God is going to be different. He is taking the idea of God and creating something new. So the idea of a supernatural God that is a personal deity in the way that we often think about it in classical theism, that who relates to us as individuals, who hears our prayer, intervenes in our lives, and can perform miracles and wonders. That version of a deity, he is saying that doesn't work for him. And so he's creating another definition of what God is. And it actually leads us into our next part here, is that we have God as a power that makes for human salvation. And so the word salvation can be a tricky word, but in classical theology and classical theism and classical Judaism, salvation we think of in the afterlife, the idea that God will redeem the people of Israel and God will save us, from harm, not only in this world, but in the next world in particular. The idea that we suffer in this world, we get rewarded in the next world, that there's going to be a redemption even from death, right? There's an eternality of the soul, right? And so we are going to have this afterlife experience. That's part of what it traditionally means when we talk about the idea of salvation in Judaism and in other faith traditions as well. The idea that God saves us, and we now have this angelic, spiritual, ethereal experience after we die, whatever that means, whatever that looks like for all of us, right? So he would argue, as I would, all human beings have physical and spiritual needs. Makes sense. So he writes here, and Marilyn, do you want to take this over here? Man,
once his psychological needs are satisfied, begins to experience the needs to overcome such traits as self-indulgence, arrogance, envy, exploitation, and hatred, or to bring under the control the aggressive forces of his nature.
So he would argue that when your physical needs are met, right, when you're safe in your home, you have a good meal, you feel like you're taken care of financially, etc., etc., when you're okay in this world, when you're not fearing for your life, that's when you can begin to work on self-improvement and development of our finer traits, and the shaving off, the elimination, even in the ideal world, of negative traits, right? And so self-improvement being something easier to do in his argumentation, if you're fine physically, right? Like if you're not worried about where your next meal comes from, you can go to yoga.
That's what Maslow talked about.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know Maslow, Abraham Maslow?
Yeah. Yeah, it is self-actualization, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a big part of what we're going to be talking about for Kaplan.
Who wrote first, him or Maslow?
What was Maslow's, what are his dates?
Oh, I think Maslow is later.
What year is this?
So we're in the early 1900s. So he lived here too.
He just probably came first.
Yeah.
Maslow took it from him.
Probably.
It sounds it.
Yeah. Though I would probably
argue before 1908.
Kaplan with this idea too.
Yeah.
I think there's a nice melding here of psychology and theology. I think there's a nice little combination here. And so we get that idea, that point. And so this is where he would argue that God comes in. That he would argue that something in the universe needs to be quote unquote out there, or just there. Maybe forget the out part. Something has to exist that helps us to achieve this goal of becoming self-actualized, right? Of self-realization. And so he would argue that the universe itself, right, the cosmos, are so constituted as to enable a person to fill this highest human need of nature, right? That the way the universe is ordered, the way the universe is created, right, pushes us towards reaching and striving to be our best selves. I think it's a beautiful thought, to be honest. I don't know how true it is. I think it's a beautiful thought. We intuitively believe that the universe operates in such a way to encourage growth and development. I hear Benji screaming in the background. I'm not sure whether or not they're getting that on your end.
Uh-oh.
But I'm hearing Benji. He's not amused for whatever reason. I'm guessing because we put him down. He likes to be carried. I'm gonna lose this arm because I'm just carrying him all the time. Oh my goodness. Okay. So our point 5: man normally veers in the direction of that which makes for the fulfillment of his destiny as a human being. That fact indicates the functioning of a cosmic power which influences his behavior. So we all are, in his belief, we are all intuitively and inherently and intrinsically built to strive for the good, to strive for making ourselves better. That's how the universe wants us to operate. Whether it happens or not, I think is another story, but that's how the universe wants us to operate, is that we're supposed to go in that direction towards self-actualization. And so that power, spoiler alert, is going to be God.
Yeah.
And, and so exactly, that's the big reveal. And so these are 6 different quotes of his. They're all sort of similar, so let's go through them quickly. The sum of everything in the world that renders life significant and worthwhile or holy. That's what God is. God is the totality of those forces in life that render human life worthwhile. God is the power that impels men to become fully human, etc., etc., etc. The sum of the animating, organizing forces and relationships which are forever making a cosmos out of chaos. So the move towards order, right? The power that makes for the fulfillment of all valid ideals, and God is the power that makes for salvation. Okay, and so now let's get to our friend salvation. Let's get to that word here. Let's see here. Leah, you want to give us a read? The conduct?
I would, but unfortunately, the print on my phone changed to huge. And so I don't have all the words on it.
That's
So,
okay. Susan, you want to give us a read?
The conduct of people today is motivated not by the desire to win for themselves a share in the world to come, which would reward all their earthly efforts and compensate all their earthly suffering, but by the desire to win for themselves a share in this world, to win success, honor, love, and everything that contributes to human well-being and self-fulfillment on earth.
Beautiful, yes. And so I think that's true, certainly, for a lot of us, certainly true for me, is that, and I would say Reform Judaism emphasizes the same point, is that we don't work to do mitzvot and do good things and to live sort of a correct life, a righteous life, because we're expecting a reward in the world to come, so that we get an eternal cosmic reward. We do good here to create a better world here, right? And to do well here, in this world, in these different ways, right? We're not thinking about heaven, we're thinking about earth. Is that jive for everyone?
Yeah.
Like mitzvahs.
Yeah. Yeah, like mitzvot. And so there are Jews who would, while I think they would all actually affirm this point in particular, there are those who certainly have a greater concern and a greater thought for afterlife and for what this means. Though, again, we're not really supposed to, even in an Orthodox tradition, be thinking about afterlife in the same way. We do mitzvot because they're the right thing to do, not because we expect a reward, for what we do. You have other theologies and other faith traditions that are very clear that you sort of work towards heaven. You do the right thing, maybe in addition to doing well here, but also because that way you're reserving your seat at the steakhouse of heaven, right? That you're doing the right thing so you can get to the afterlife, because this life is meaningless, and it's really the afterlife that counts. Judaism is
But what about having a better relationship with other humans and with God? I mean, isn't it about relationship and connection? I mean, because this seems so cold to me.
This Mordecai Kaplan?
Yeah, this whole thing is just emotionless and cold.
Really? I think it's beautiful. He's talking all about doing good things.
Well, that's nice. But I think one thing that the Christian religion has that we don't have is this sense of God is with me. I can share my feelings. Someone is here, so I'm not alone. And I really think this is missing here.
Well, for Kaplan's theology, it is missing, because Kaplan doesn't believe in that same personal God, or again, he's going to frame it differently, as we're going to see. But the idea of the God who intervenes in our world, he thinks is Mishigas.
That's a different Judaism.
That's a different Judaism. That's different theology, where you'll have more classical theists, and certainly the Orthodox movement, well, and conservative even has it more. Though we have it Reformed too. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that there's more diversity in the Reform movement theologically and the conservative movement theologically than the Orthodox. It's a little bit more standardized and a little bit more monolithic. But the idea that, we don't have the personification in the same way. We don't have, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. We don't have the personification of God, the actual anthropomorphized God that they do, hanging on the wall. We don't have that in the same way. They have that, that different emotional connection. Though I would argue that I think that emotional connection does exist within Judaism, and that personal connection to God, exists. I don't think anything rules it out. That we can't have it if we so want. Mordecai Kaplan does not want it. Or doesn't view it in that way. But there's certainly a lot of theology that would bring us to a similar place. Of that emotional, personalized connection to God. Not for Kaplan, though, and certainly not. So Kaplan identified salvation with, spoiler, we sort of had it already, with self-realization or self-fulfillment. So we save ourselves, so to speak, or God helps us become the best that we're going to be. It's just not an active presence in the same way. It's not, again, God intervening personally. It's that salvation is when we become our best selves. So self-fulfillment or self-realization is nothing more than the modern equivalent of what in general life is expressed by the term salvation, and in traditional Jewish life by the phrase having a share in the world to come. So again, salvation is self-fulfillment. When we become the best version of ourselves, that's it. That's the end goal, right? That's game over. We did it right, which I think actually is a very nice view, because again, it takes away the idea of the afterlife, obviously, that concern, and says that what's our goal? Our goal is to be the best that we can be. That's when we become the highest expression of ourselves. Is that when we become good people. To put it tritely. So
this is very ecumenical, though.
Yeah, I think that this theology can be expressed and has been expressed in different faith traditions. 100%. I would say that again, those of us who have friends in the more liberal Christian world, some of this I think would ring true, as would boobers and other things. They would ring true depending on which Christian denomination it is. It might not ring true for Greek Orthodox, but it might ring true for Episcopalians, and Presbyterians in a different way. Though I think
Unitarians who believe in everything.
Which ones?
Unitarians.
Oh yeah, Unitarians, definitely. Unitarians you never have any problem with. Yeah.
I know, I'm going there next because they take everybody's holiday for their own. I like that.
The Unitarians and the Baha'i. The
Yeah.
Baha'i are great with that too.
Yeah.
You want to have a nice, relaxing conversation, you go to the Baha'i.
Yeah.
Never heard of
They're really chill.
There is a Baha'i group here up on Gulf Bay.
Yeah, I had lunch there with
Yeah.
one of their guys.
Nice people.
Yeah,
how do you spell that? Bahai? I never heard of that.
yeah, Baha, and you get usually 2 apostrophes then an I.
Yeah.
But they're a fascinating study in and of themselves. For another day, but they're fantastic. So to believe in God means to take for granted that it is man's destiny to rise above the brute and to eliminate all forms of violence and exploitation from human society. And so that, to him, that's what belief means. That it's not about believing in an entity, a personal entity in some way, but it's to believe that there's some, again, force that compels us for the good. And I think this next point is actually really important, is that and it actually, is somewhat ironic given our studies, is that he says it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you perceive God, how you conceive God, as long as we believe in God, and that belief in God makes us a difference in our lives. That's very ecumenical, right? That's very pluralistic. That he'll say, it doesn't matter what you believe about God, as long as that belief matters to you in such a way that it's going to be significant, that's going to motivate you to live your best life, whether you believe in God, and whether you believe in the Trinity, whether you believe in Ganesha, whether you believe in whatever it's going to be, it doesn't matter, because as long as it's going to build up, you up and going to make a difference in your life, that's how it's going to be. I don't know if Kaplan will go that far, by the way. I'm taking some liberties, but that is what is, I think, expressed here, that idea that as long as it changes you in a way, that's what matters.
I like that B.
Yeah, me too.
Rabbi, I have a question. All of the stuff that you're saying about Kaplan, this was stated many years ago. How much of this do the Reconstructionists still go with at this time?
So this is where it goes into diversity, right? And so it depends on which Reconstructionist you're talking to.
Yeah, okay.
And honestly, I think a lot of his ideas have become so influential that I would argue that you will find Reform rabbis, Reform Jews, conservative rabbis, conservative Jews that have elements of his theology, if not have imported his whole theology into their own in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of things that we read about self-actualization and fulfillment, and about God not being, a genie, and about, how we relate to whatever we call the holy in God in our lives, I think has become, again, very, I think in 1920, this felt much more radical. I think in the 21st century, it feels very, egalitarian, pluralistic, ecumenical, and rational in a lot of ways. It does lack, as Leah was saying, it can lack a little bit of the emotion and spirituality. It might be a little bit more, again, more logical, rational, process-oriented than, a Hasidic sort of thinker, and, an emotional, crying, or the other side, joyous, exultant, religious experience. That's not what we have here. This is a different way of looking at it. Not the Haredim, more trembling before God. That's where they get their name from, right? Is that they're so overcome with emotion and spirituality, and the force of the divine. It's a different theology, different way of looking at it. And so this comes in, and we're going to run out of time here in a couple minutes.
Yeah, I want to get to the end.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, but we're going to get close. We're going to get close. So is God a power or a person? And so the idea for Kaplan is that God can't be some kind of invisible Superman, displaying the same traits as men, but on a greater scale. It doesn't work for him. We can't think of God as loving, pitying, rewarding, or punishing. That God doesn't have those emotions. That we can't thingify God. We can't make God a thing. We have to connect to God as a power or a process. And so I like this quote over here. God is the process by which the universe produces persons, and persons are the process by which God is manifest in the individual. And so it is through our lives, through how we relate to each other, through how we go about creating the best self. That's where God is. God is not, he's not a naturalist, in the very traditional sense where God is like in the tree. God is part of everything, but he's not a pagan, he's not a pantheist. But it's the idea that God is everywhere, and God is that force, that creative life force that animates the universe. And this is where, again, it becomes tricky in terms of language, that he says a God who makes a difference in one's personal life should be a personal God, right? Just because it is not personal in the classical theistic model, he says it should be personal for us. That creative force is meaningful, right? It should have value. It should compel us to what is good, to what is great, to what is holy, to what is sacred. It should do that for us, but again, in a different way than we would view God and a more anthropomorphic, self that has emotions. That we can think of God that way, but it doesn't mean that it's not personal. And I like that, that aspect of it.
Did they try kicking Kaplan out? I think they did, didn't they?
Say again?
Did they try kicking Kaplan out of the religion altogether?
I think that he had struggles with his conservative colleagues. He was ordained by the movement.
He's radical.
I don't know if he was ever like really, sort of brought up on those kinds of charges. I think that he brought so much theology to the table that it made people think differently, and it certainly challenged people. Still challenges people, without a doubt. We don't have to spend a lot of time on 8. We know that one already. Kaplan doesn't allow for miracles, doesn't work, that way. God doesn't subvert the natural law. But going back to an earlier point, he says, just because miracles don't exist doesn't mean we throw away the Bible. Doesn't mean we throw out rabbinic Judaism. Because as civilization evolved, Judaism is expressed differently, right? And so what worked for Jewish thought 2,000 years ago was good for that time. And now we don't need it anymore in the same way. So going back to the idea of what I think it was Marilyn took with the idea of, how we grow and evolve as people. We don't want to get rid of our own childish notions that we had when we were 5, saying, well, those were stupid, those are terrible, those were meaningless. They had meaning when we were 5. They had meaning when we were 10. They had meaning in our teen years. But now we're different, God willing, than when we were 5. That we have different thoughts, different ideas. It doesn't invalidate those experiences from earlier on. We incorporate them, and we evolve, and we change, and we grow. And so this is where he doesn't become an atheist, right? He doesn't become someone who's completely outside the bounds of Jewish tradition. He loves Jewish tradition, but he relates to it differently. Prayer is tricky, going back to our universalist friends as well, because can you pray to a process? It doesn't work in the same way, right? So the idea of a God who shomea tefillah, the God who hears prayer, that's so important to many of us, right? The idea that when we pray, we assume that prayer necessitates a listening God. Because if we're praying and there's no listening God, then we can argue we're talking to ourselves. And what's the point? Well, Kaplan says there is a point, that prayer aims at deriving from the process that constitutes God the power that would strengthen the forces and relationships by which we fulfill ourselves as persons. Otherwise said is that when we speak the prayers, we're connecting to God. It doesn't matter if God hears us, we hear ourselves, right? And we are refocusing ourselves on what is important and what is valuable and what is meaningful. We are engaging in an act of self-awareness and reflection. So what we have here is that the key is the utterance, right? It's not the hearing, it's the saying that matters. It's the saying that is important. because when we say it, then we believe it. We make it real for ourselves. And that has the value. It's not about God hearing our prayers, it's about us hearing ourselves and then turning our words into action. And that prayer changes those who pray for the better, which I think, by the way, is tremendously important and valuable, is that the whole idea of prayer is that we should be able to stand up from our prayers and say, you know, it should refocus us, to recharge us, to reanimate us in a way, to focus on the good, to focus on creating a better world, creating a better self, you know, being a better neighbor, being a better, you know, a person in the world. And so we're raising our level here on 5 of consciousness to those desires, because we all have them, again, according to his theology, these innate impulses to strive for the good. So when we pray, you know, it brings those desires that are inside us to the surface and makes them, again, more real for us. The problem of evil, we have, you know, so if God is basically all that is good in the universe, everything that enhances human life, evil then becomes the opposite. And so evil is what hinders self-realization, self-actualization, all the forces of chaos, right? We're striving for order, and evil is chaotic. Evil is not evolved, right? And so our job is to help create with God a more evolved society, a more progressive society, a more self-actualized society, because that's the evil part, is that's not actualized, that's chaos, that is disorder and disharmony and cruelty and all that other bad stuff, that's without the power, without the process, without that creative force of God. And so it's our job then to work with God to realize the good, to create the good, and to then get rid of, eradicate evil through that creative force in the world, that partnership of the creative force in the world and ourselves.
Did you make this outline?
Yeah.
All right, would you send that with the other lesson?
Sure.
Yeah, that's good.
I
But
thought
where,
this was very good.
where does morality come from then? I mean, you know, are the 10 commandments the 10 suggestions? Or, I mean, you know, what the heck? How do we know it's evil and good?
So he would say that that's the creative force in that universe, you know, the power that works, you know, through the universe, is that's where morality comes from.
I took a course in world religions.
Yeah.
And I wrote this paper. To me, it was like the collective unconscious. All the religions are saying the same thing, is what's good. So it's sort of a collective unconscious of what is right and good. And I find this was really meaningful today, because I find, like, I don't know, I watched some of the news stories, like when Cuomo talks, Governor Cuomo, I'm from New York, and I watch him talk, and he talks about New Yorkers, and they help each other, and they'll help the world if you help us when we need you. And I just feel like he is impersonating this right now, even though he's not Jewish.
I think it goes through, as you said, a lot of different religious beliefs. The idea is that, you know, we should be motivated and compelled by our faith, you know, and our belief in God to strive for the good and to create a better self and a better world. And it's just how we view that deity, how we define that word God. What does that mean to us? That's what changes.
Right, and I think he's just the drive. This talks about the drive to reach this height of, not because we're consciously driving for it, but because we're driven to do it.
Yes, that we are pushed
to do good. I mean, the people who go work in the hospitals day in and day out, you watch those. Did anybody watch the ER, the crisis in the ER on CNN? They took you in a tour of the ER in New York, and to watch what the workers do and their commitment, like that's what they wouldn't think of not doing it.
Yeah. I wouldn't watch CNN unless I was unconscious and didn't know what was going on.
Not a fan?
Not a fan.
Not a fan. Oh my goodness. Well, on that note, we are going to sign off here in just a second before this kicks us off. But I would want to wish everyone a Zisen Pesach. Have a good and kosher Pesach. Enjoy. Chag Sameach. We're going to have our second night Seder, via Zoom on Thursday. But enjoy your first night of Passover and have a really good experience. Again, I know it's challenging in our times to sort of like enjoy it, but I do think that Passover just provides us with that moment, right, of thinking about the journey from slavery to freedom. Right now, we might feel a little bit imprisoned by our situation, but this too shall pass, and we're gonna, sort of march out to this in a different way. But right now, we got to do what we got to do. We got to stay safe. We have to wash up. Orchat's very important in Passover. Tomorrow night, be sure to wash your hands. A lot of Purelling, perhaps. Have a great, meaningful Seder experience. Have a great Passover, and I'll see you all soon. We are having class next week.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Good
Happy
night.
Passover.
Good night, happy
Bye.
Good
Passover,
night, everybody.
everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Rabbi.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
My pleasure, everybody. Have a good night.
Enjoy the family.
You too.
Enjoy.